All right, everybody, hello. So today is what is it, May 1st, and the we've recently just had Venus ingress into Taurus and Mars ingress into Aries. And this is the significant thing about this is that Venus is sharing the sign of Taurus with the Sun, Jupiter, and Uranus, and Pluto is currently in Aquarius, making a square to Venus. Um, and I'm going to be focusing mainly on this stuff today rather than the Mars and Aries. Um, Now, we recently had Jupiter and Uranus perfect their conjunction, and now they're separating, which has a strong influence on this dynamic, even although the Pluto Venus square is a bit more of a tighter aspect right now. Um, and I'm just gonna get into a more of a personal story about how this has been. I'm experiencing this transit, which is fairly recent and new. And I have to admit that I kind of have some ideas around this, but my it feels a little bit like chaotic, a little bit to me. There's something about the Jupiter Uranus conjunction that Uranus is usually kind of associated as being a kind of disruptive, kind of chaotic planet that has to do with sort of like technological insights and revelations and all this kind of stuff. And but like the Pluto usually has to do with things that are kept secret or hidden, that kind of stuff. And I'll just get into it. That in previous videos I have mentioned this when talking about Pluto transits and trying to divine the meaning of what Pluto means. And I gave the example that up until my early 20s, it was basically kept hidden from me by my family that I was like a sperm donor baby. That the man who raised me as my father, who nonetheless was very influential on my life, he wasn't actually biologically my dad, and because he had fertility problems, and my mom had to use a sperm donor clinic. And I'm in my mid 30s, and I've known this for about like 15 years now. And I was only a couple of years ago that I decided to do the 23andMe test. Just because I didn't even know anything about my biological father side of the family at all, right? And what was interesting is that today, as I'm making this video, the moon is in Aquarius where Pluto is, and yesterday the moon ingressed into Aquarius. The moon conjoined Pluto and Aquarius, which was setting off the square between Venus and Taurus and Pluto and Aquarius. And what happened was basically with my 23andMe thing, it was pretty quiet on the whole, trying to connect with relatives from my sperm donor's family. But basically, I had somebody who is biologically my half sister contact me on 23andMe, and we had a bit of it. And like what was interesting is it was more of it like this Jupiter Uranus, as in like, or Jupiter Uranus being like the technological breakthrough, and the Pluto being the sort of secret hidden thing. And like this person did not know that they were. I'm just it could also possibly there's some off chance that maybe the sperm donor parent also maybe knocked somebody up secretly or something. But like this person, their mother was not divulging the information about their birth when being questioned, and so it's like I was breaking the news to this person that most likely they were a sperm donor baby like me, and that we were like sperm donor siblings. And so that basically that's what happened while the moon conjoined Pluto and made this Pluto Venus square. And there's certain things about this that I have to say I'm like, my sister is also a sperm donor baby, but she came from a different sperm donor, and she found out that somebody she went to high school with, she wasn't like best friends with, but somebody that she was like knew in her grade was actually a half brother, and she didn't find out until after she graduated high school and got her 23andMe done that this person was actually related to her. And she's even found other people come up as being half siblings. and she's not really making that big of a deal of it. But the person who I met online doesn't have any siblings, and I think there's like, to me it feels like there's something about Pluto and Pluto-Venus aspects that, I mean, I don't want to say it's like this all the time because it's kind of a like there is a stereotype of like a weird stalker, right? And like there's a whole kind of, to me, like I'm kind of a little bit, I feel kind of ambivalent about it to some way, but it's like, it feels kind of awkward. I mean, I don't know, if you break the news to somebody, it's kind of big news, but like I don't really know how much weight I should put on to just having like people I'm biologically related to who are looking for some kind of like, what do you know, like some people who don't have the siblings that are like, I've got a long lost brother out there, and you know, there's that kind of like, there's like the secret that's been revealed, and now I'm your long lost relative, and I'm kind of like, there's something uncomfortable about that for me, and I'm not really sure how to proceed. Although I mean, I figured like I don't know, maybe I'll trade photos or something to see if this person looks like me, but like the person doesn't even live where I live anymore, right? They live on the other, I'm not going to get into all that detail about it, but I'm not really there's something about that with the Pluto Venus square that is playing out already, and it like works with the astrology because it like happened perfectly in time with the moon transiting that square, now, the thing there, rather than just get, like, I have to say, I feel a bit like maybe I'm just reacting to this and kind of expressing it, but there's a way to navigate this into something that's more of a deeper analysis of the archetype using the situation as an example. And basically, you know, I'm trained in astrology by Adam Elenbaas. I still watch his videos. And in his video that he did recently on this transit, he was talking about how the, you know, Pluto in Aquarius stands for this kind of like archetypal blueprint of the ideal or something like this, and that Venus and Taurus is more of like the earthly, sensuous, harmonious thing, and about the potential conflicts of these not really matching up or something. But based on what's playing out in my life, I have a slightly different perspective on it that has to do with, for one thing, I think it's fair to say that Aquarius has a certain aptitude for science and technology and that kind of way of looking at things. Whereas, you know, Venus and Taurus, I kind of think of more about like, you know, making soul food, right? Like, or like country music or some kind of like, there's a certain sentimentality, down to earth kind of thing with Venus and Taurus. And there's the kind of like the Venusian, well, before getting, like there's something about this idea about the ideal. And I have to admit, you know, like I've kind of gone through a bit of a change, or I've been, you know, at one point in time, I remember making this video about Neptune, and I was talking about this Tarkovsky movie, Stalker, and about how this sort of, like, you know, I guess it's been an ongoing thing, me contemplating the idea of idealism, and I've been, you know, I've been taking certain courses, I've been reading certain books, and my perspective on this stuff is kind of evolving and changing, and, but if we look at, if you stick to what's going on, there's the idea of like using the idea of like archetypes and ideals as archetypal blueprints, right? That there's some sort of perfect form that exists as a kind of a blueprint, and then all that is created out of these forms that are like the perfect ideal that we're trying to match, but because we're living in the earthly world that's not perfect, we don't match the ideal form, or, you know, that kind of thing, right? But if we look at what's going on with the situation that I just described with this 23andMe stuff, that the way the world works is that we have DNA. And the DNA is kind of like more like a literal blueprint in the fact that it's actually organic material, that it's not it's like, it's kind of funny because when you think of a code, you think of something that is like conceptual, like an idea that then gets translated into something material. But when you're talking about DNA actually is a material, but material that is kind of like a material code that gives your body the blueprints for how your body constructs itself, right? And of course, there's also a epigenetic factor of like based on your what happens in your life, different kinds of traumas and different types of circumstances, different genes will be activated in different ways, right? Now, the thing about this is that there's like, when we get into the ideal, is that there's the there's a you go back to like the ancient Greeks and the there's this kind of like there's this whole problem that kind of deals with dualism, right? That is like a problem with stuff like Western philosophy, like, you know, usually they pin it on Rene Descartes. You know, you can also like people also criticize Kant for kind of exacerbating this problem, right? But there's still a kind of a basic dualism if you go all the way back to Plato, in the sense that Plato is saying that there is like the world that we all inhabit, and then, you know, like with Plato's cave, if we could just escape the cave and see the light, then we see this other reality, this other perspective that is like in a kind of you know, it's seeing the forms that are underlying what's going on, right? Now, like, okay, there's something kind of complicated about this in the sense that I don't like. What's the best way to approach this? Like, give me a second, because I've got a kind of a fairly complicated idea that I'm trying to work out in kind of real time here. Because like, I mean, there's certain problems, like certain landmines to do with this that'll just, you know, I might as well just go straight into the controversy, which is like, you know, it's Pluto, right? Pluto can be controversial, so I might as well go there, right? There's certain controversies such as, you know, Pluto was discovered, let's face it, when around the time that the fascism and the Nazis and all this stuff was coming to power, and there was this whole idea of like, you know, with science, this, like, I mean, at the most basic level, let's talk, there's stuff about racism, white supremacy, eugenics, all this kind of stuff, and the idea that there's some like they needed to find some kind of racial purity, or to, you know, preserve this, like, basically there's a sort of ideal identity that goes with, like, you know, like nationalism and all this kind of stuff. But like, if you really get into this, it's kind of weird because, like, let's put it this way: if we actually get into the way genetics work, right? If you think about how you have each person has two parents, and then each of those parents have two parents, so you have your, like, you know, obviously you have your parents, and then you have your grandparents on one side of the family, your grandparents on another side of the family, and then for each of those grandparents you have two sets of great grandparents, right? And like, if you keep thinking about this image where you are the result of, like, as you keep going back into your ancestors, you start drawing from a wider and wider pool of ancestors, right? There is a tendency to run into this thing where the ideal of some sort of, like, you're trying to get back to, like, well, where did I really come from? What's, like, the pure origin of where I come from? It could be actually a lot more mixed up than we think, because we've got a wider pool, like, as we keep going back into our ancestors, there's a wider range of genetic material going into creating the mix that we are, right? And I'll give it, like, and this is the kind of thing I also have to say with this whole Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, that there's this stuff going on that I've been trying to avoid with, like, the there's all this war with Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Palestine and let's just put straight up. I have on my mother's side, I have Ukrainian genetics, and just to face facts that that side of my family, there's this controversy that came up where in the Canadian Parliament they had the whole Parliament salute this Ukrainian guy who served as a Nazi under the Nazis in World War II, right? And there's this whole thing about the way that the politics of the Ukraine is that they were caught in between Russia, who went communist, and the fascists of Germany, and the whole problem about like European anti-Semitism is like, if you just face facts and look at my ancestors, there's this funny thing that on one hand, a lot of my ancestors were anti-Semites. My grandparents were anti-Semitic, right? It's like, I don't want to put up a bunch of Ukrainian flags and then also one of my reasons why I don't want to get into all this kind of stuff is that I don't want to go and get all worked up about the Palestinian thing, and then I think you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic, but those fault lines are there, and I don't want to exacerbate them, right? But the funny thing is, at the same time that my Eastern European family are anti-Semitics, they also found out that they also had Jews in the family, right? So there's this weird contradiction where you can be, on one hand, have you follow these racial lines and find out that you're a bunch of basically like anti-Semitic people that would probably, if they stuck around in Europe, they probably would have sided with the Nazis, but then at the same time they would have been horrified to find out that they have Jewish ancestors and that they have some sort of internal self-hatred towards this. So I've got both anti-Semites and Jews in my biological history, right? And like, I have to admit that I had this funny trip, the first time I went traveling. I don't know if it probably doesn't make sense unless I give the background story, which I'm not going to do, but I was traveling around in Eastern Europe. I even went to the Ukraine. I went to this festival called the Guča festival, which is a trumpet festival in Serbia, and it was just weird because they had the big war in the 90s with all this ethnic genocide, and you can still tell that there's the shadow and the aftermath of all that, but I just didn't get it because there's all these people of different ethnicities that would come together and party, but at the same time, there'd be all these people that look like they're like fascists or something, or like these really there's these massive 7-foot tall giants that look like they could snap me like a twig, and they have shaved heads, and they look like these fucking, you know what I mean, these sort of it's like, but at the same time, I'm kind of, so eventually I was in the Guča festival. I was asking this, I can't remember who it was exactly I was asking, but basically I'm a foreigner. I don't understand. Can you try to explain the politics around this? And I don't really understand the cultural dynamic of this scene. And one of the guys kind of saying that they had this thing where they with the ethnic cleansing and all this stuff, where there were the people who identified as Serbian wanted to make Kosovo exclusively Serbian, and by using the idea of ethnic purity or something like that to basically eliminate everybody who wasn't. But the whole thing is if you actually, the point is if you actually get into what the genes are like, is that people, this idea that you identify with one thing genetically, and then you're going to go kill the people that identify with something else, you may actually find out that you are related. The people that you're killing are your cousins, right? And it's you're constructing this false ideal out of, you have some simplified idea of oh, my ethnic purity, this pure original source where I come from, and we need to eliminate all the people who are different so we can go back to this innocent, pure thing. But it's obviously, first of all, not very innocent. It's also obviously bullshit. And it's obviously using the pretense of something that's kind of simplistic and naive to basically do a power play so you can seize land and territory for your cause, and all the people, under basically a false pretense, because you're probably just, the people that you are fighting with are probably more like your cousins than people who are somehow diametrically opposed because you sprang out of like some completely different root or whatever, right? I mean, and that's just talking about it in terms of the, racial stuff. You could also go, there's a certain thing about like going in another direction with like, gay and lesbian or trans or intersex stuff. Like there's this idea of like, there's certain problems with, I'm just running straight into it, obviously, right? There are people whose YouTube channels I watch, whose content I consume and that I appreciate, but they keep running into this problem that they call the Judith Butler Jihad, right? Of like the performativity of gender and all this kind of stuff. Or like there's a whole culture war going on about like, traditional family ideals versus this sort of like new territory of like, but like there's a whole kind of thing about like trying to have this ideal that, let's say, being completely like straight and gender conforming is in line with some sort of like blueprint, like higher truth of the way reality is. But if you actually look at the way genes work, in the same way that you may be, similar to how you're not just from one line of ancestry, you may actually be a big mix of different ancestors, because the further you go into the past, the more ancestors you have. There's also like, the way that genes play out is not as simple as just like, men and women, and there are people who are biologically intersex, and that, we're used to the idea of transgender, of being like, I was born the certain way, but I have an idea of myself that's different, and I need to change my body to suit this idea, right? But it could also be this other way around, where you have gender conforming surgery, where a person is in between one gender and another, and if you actually get to the science of what is going on with their chromosomes and their biology, it's more of a messy picture than just they're specifically being men and women. And it could be the other way around, where the person is biologically more non-binary, and that they have surgery going the other way, which rather than making them trying to make them conform to an ideal which is basically imaginary rather than the actual material truth of the situation that we're in, right? And there's another example is even just like the whole gay and lesbian thing, saying like, people might say that like, oh, there's like a natural law that governs all things, and that natural law you can see in human beings and you can see in nature, and heterosexuality is a reflection of this perfect like symmetry or polarity and stuff like. But if you look at nature, there's tons of like gay animals, like gay penguins, gay tiger, whatever. Like there's lions that are gay. There's all sorts of like nature itself is actually really queer. Right? And there's something about this, though, that results that there's a certain thing about the difference between, well, when you get into like religious stuff, like I have to just say I'm kind of interested in religious topics. I'm interested in theology. I got this idea to start some kind of a Bible study group at one point in time. But to be honest, I kind of did one thing with a few people, and then I got distracted. But like, I'm interested in the Bible and I'm interested in religion, but I was never raised Christian, right? And so I'm kind of feel like I approach religion from the point of view of an outsider. And I was raised Unitarian, who are raised to have more socially progressive attitudes about being inclusive of gay people. So I mean, it's kind of like shaped on how I was brought up, but this whole thing about like God and the devil, there is this like there's like a, you know, you may, if you're not as familiar with these sensitive theological arguments, you may be familiar with the band Black Sabbath, who had a song called Lord of This World. And there's something about this theological thing about how the God representing this kind of transcendent ideal, which is like forever out of this perfection that's forever out of reach, but the fall from Eden, the fall into earthly matter is like a fall into a world of imperfection, right? And the whole thing about like if we actually go with what the way reality is in terms of like scientific reality, that it's like, and if you use this sort of kind of Christian mythology, that scientific reality is basically the reality of the devil, right? Because there's this association of like the transcendent good as being these perfect ideals, which like, you know, they may seem conceptually like perfect ideals, like having a perfect male, a perfect female as some sort of blueprint that we need to follow. But if you actually look at real life, we have nature being incredibly queer. We have humans that their actual biology can be like intersex and not fall into these categories. And you can have all sorts of or like you could also have this idea that you have some sort of pure origin point of like a pure race or whatever, right? And then you can find out that you're like, oh, wait a minute, my ancestors were a bunch of crazy, on one hand, a bunch of crazy anti-Semites who were also, didn't know that they were also Jewish, and so had some sort of internalized self-hatred playing out at an unconscious level because, based on these ideas that are apparently perfect and pure, and they play out in a way that it was really, you know, this is one thing I got from, I don't know. This is the thing is like, I have to say I'm a huge fan of weird studies, but I'm kind of like, I don't know if my I don't know what the hell they think about the videos that I'm doing. If I'm being overly like, I don't want to like embarrass the people that I look up to or whatever, or that I get, you know, have some sort of inspiration from. But there's I took a course with J.F. Martel, and I think it was Thomas Aquinas that had this line that I got from him, that it's like, when man, you know, like the idea of beastliness and being an angel, right? And this idea that like, oh man, I'm probably going to forget the actual quote here, but there's like this idea that if we, by trying to appeal to this perfect standard or this perfect ideal of this angelic perfection, but then living in the real world, which is basically the world where we are, you know, in some way, I mean, we're not exactly animals. We have a certain faculty, a rational faculty that animals don't have. And maybe this rational faculty helps us access this sort of like pure, you know, these pure ideals of perfect concepts. But by trying to make our lives appeal to this sort of like this pure ideal, then we become the beast, right? That we become more, there's this kind of contradiction where by trying to be angels, or by trying to live to the ideal, we are actually end up being more evil, being more monstrous, being more beastly. And then if we accept our animal nature, if we accept our imperfections, if we accept the apparently fallen, you know, the fall from Eden into the world, which is ruled by the devil, if we accept that and have in a compassionate way, then we are more angelic than trying to make ourselves into these perfectly pure, ideal, and angel people, right? And this is kind of, for me, this is kind of like a weird, it's kind of, there's a certain tension here, because it's like, socially, you know, I'm kind of isolated right now, but a few years ago I was living in Vancouver Island, and the people that I was exposed to on Vancouver Island like there's a lot of hippies, and like there's also religious people, but I mean, I wasn't really. You'd have like Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door, right? And they're not like the kind of there's kind of some kind of wacky rural Christian fundamentalists that are probably not the kind of people that I make friends with or hang out with. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of hippie kind of people that are more associate with being like neo-pagan or something like that, right? And a lot of these people that are more like hippies kind of have this, I mean, and on one hand, they could just be horny and they don't like this idea of these Christian ideals of like purity and chastity, don't harsh my buzz, man, with your Christian purity, like that kind of attitude, right? Like, but there's some like the general what it was like on the island is that people like they would be very offended at like the idea of like human beings being superior to animals, right? Or that being very offended at putting down our beastly animal nature, in favor of some sort of like Puritan ideal of like unearthly angelic purity or something like that. But that's basically there's a long history. I'm Canadian on the West Coast, and there's this whole kind of history that goes in with the controversy around Catholic Church and missionary work and the Aboriginal Indigenous population and people who like this whole thing about like the rational ideals of Western man coming into conflict with the savages of Indigenous people and trying to the whole brutal history of colonialism, all this kind of stuff. And I mean this goes completely with the Pluto power dynamic, and also Pluto's trying to transform things. I mean, it's a big messy issue, right? And I'm just diving straight into it without. I mean, I don't even know. This, like I said, for me, it's a big. It's a big thing to try to unpack and try to talk about, but I'm just giving it a try anyways, right? And while I'm on it, there's a couple books. Okay, like I may have already mentioned this one, but this. Can We Believe in People? It basically addresses some of the topics that I'm talking about today. This guy is a Christian Neoplatonist, and I'm not. I can't say I'm a completely. I'm not showing this book because I subscribe entirely to this guy's point of view, but I think it's a good book. And one of the things, though, about this book in particular is that rather than being like putting down, getting to the superiority complex of putting down our animal nature in favor of this this transcendent ideal of rationality, we could also say that the world that we live in as human beings who have all this technology and industry, and that we have some sort of way of we have some sort of responsibility of choosing whether we clear cut all our forests for lumber or whether we set up nature reserves. We have some responsibility for stewardship, basically, right? That is not to say that human beings are good and animals are bad, but rather in some way we are animals ourselves. In some way we have some faculty that we have more power over the circumstance than the animals do, and that we have some kind of responsibility for how we're creating and shaping the world through and he argues it through animals. He's arguing that we have free choice in a way that we can look at our options, we can look at our actions, and we can make certain choices. Whereas if you're an animal, if you're a dog and you see a rabbit and the rabbit runs, do you think the dog is really thinking about whether or not to chase the rabbit, or does the dog just chase the rabbit, right? If an animal is going to if a squirrel is going to leap from one branch to another, a squirrel may be trying to calculate whether it can make the jump or not, but it doesn't if you're an animal, you don't have the same range of options or the ability to consciously make choices that a human does. And then furthermore, humans are the the choices humans are making are now at the level of, like, you know what I'm saying, like nuclear bombs and like building hydroelectric dams and all sorts of like things like that that are just completely on a different domain than what an animal is like. And it's just the fact of the matter that we have more responsibility to look after the earth than animals do, right? And there's like some other books that I don't know if I should get into all these books or not. I don't even know where I left them all at this point. Well, do I have anything else to get into with this one? I don't know. There's another book that I had that's relevant to this topic, but I'm not sure where I put it at the moment. So you'll have to excuse me on that one. And like I said, I'm just sort of like kind of on a kind of free flow here, just getting into these topics in a kind of like wild and chaotic way. So you know, I wasn't necessarily planning on getting into all this sort of like but you know, it goes with the Pluto square, right? So it is topically relevant. All right, well, I guess this is good enough. Hopefully you guys got something out of this video. Thanks for supporting the channel. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. All right.